Right, so my name is Charlotte. I'm from Berlin and I will be presenting for Team 8. So, slide. So we decided to focus on three main points that we thought would be most important and most realistic to sort of use in cities, and we thought it would also be important that these sort of techniques could also be used on already existing cities. So the distribution of tasks, we have Dominica and Britta from the Netherlands who worked on urban farming. Katarina and I were from Germany and we worked on accessible and environmental public transport. And Wayne and David from Hong Kong worked on reducing meat consumption. Right, so our first topic is urban farming. First I will cover how, then the benefits and for humans as well as the environment. So how? We noticed that in a lot of cities there are so many unused spaces that just sort of exist, and we thought it would be sort of a great way to give back to nature by converting flat roofs and unused areas all around the city into gardens. This would mean that we could achieve a greater biodiversity in cities as well as increase just a general amount of plants, which would decrease air, noise, and light pollution. Benefits for us humans, sort of, aside from the obvious environmental benefits, would be that we could grow our own food right here in the city, which would drastically reduce the amount of transport having to be done. Right now we have a lot of food that is being imported from warmer countries. The vegetables you eat in winter are often imported from Spain, for example. So that would just sort of mean that you are way closer to your source of produce. For example, in the Netherlands, around 75% of the food is actually imported, and a great deal of food that is produced in the Netherlands is exported to other countries. Environmental benefits of urban gardening include drastic reduction in pollution. First of all, we have air pollution. The plants obviously could convert the CO2 into oxygen, but they also sort of shelter us from noises. They absorb the noise. So, for example, planting a bunch of plants on rooftop gardens would reduce the noise above cities, and it would also increase biodiversity within cities, meaning that we have much more space for birds and insects, for example, to live and grow and be able to develop. Other benefits include isolation on buildings. So as you can see in this picture, it's sort of covered in these vines, and it helps isolate the building. So as the climate grows warmer, the plants actually help isolate and cool the inside, as many houses in Europe, for example, don't have air conditioning. And at the same time, it would help in winter to sort of keep the heat inside. Our next topic is environmental transport. So the first question is how to make transport environmentally friendly. So we have three main points for that. The first is imposing a CO2 tax. Then we have car sharing, and lastly, we have electronic public transport. So to start us off, this is only a transition model that we would implement to sort of transition everyone into using more environmentally friendly transport. So a CO2 tax is already being used in several places, and it's working all right, I would say. But there are always certain ways to improve them, and really following through on the CO2 tax would help encourage people immensely towards switching to more environmental ways of transport. Car sharing is a very big thing already. In Berlin, for example, you can go outside and you can log into an app, and then usually it'll tell you where the next car sharing car is parked, and you can then use it for the day. So it is an insanely attractive offer for people, especially for students, and college students who cannot afford their own vehicles yet. So the ultimate goal here is to sort of make all cars shared and part of public transport, actually, which would mean that it's less expensive for people because you don't have to afford your own car, and you also don't have to buy your own parking when you move into somewhere. For example, you have to buy spots in parking garages right now, which would just fall away because all parking spots would be for public use. It would also increase community because you could share rides, for example, with your neighborhood or with friends. So it'd be, sort of like a more private small bus. Lastly, we have electric transport. So 17% of the world's buses right now are electric. And in Berlin, for example, we are slowly transitioning to have more and more buses in the public transport fleet. So 2014 was when this phase started, and as you can see, we had 29 buses in the entire sort of city going around that were electric. And by 2016, it was already 290. So it's going steadily up, and they're very quiet. I've been on a couple myself, so they're very quiet, they're very comfortable, and it's sort of, a very nice thing to have. In London, on the other hand, they are transitioning their trains to be more electric rather than using diesel fuel. So yeah, benefits of this include less air and especially less noise pollution. Like, you will notice that electric buses and trains are way more quiet than the ones that use other fuels. Now, as research has shown, just providing attractive sort of options for public transport is often not enough. And so there are certain additional changes that we thought of to make these sort of the cities more attractive for public transport. So the first of these is having a high population density. Having a high population density means that sort of everything grows closer together and you have less space in between the places that you need to be, which means more people would actually, feel able to walk and be able to walk. Of course, the problem here is that you don't want the population density to get too high, but in order to sort of balance out people walking, a lot of people have suggested that you add more green areas to the streets. So adding trees along the streets, adding green passageways would help encourage people to actually walk more. Traffic calming is also a very big sort of idea that we had, which is initially meant to sort of ease the segregation between the vehicles and traffic. So right now, we would say that cars largely dominate traffic and streets are often built for cars. But this is traffic calming is designed to sort of end that segregation. So we do this by adding sidewalk extensions and narrowing streets to sort of slow down cars, and especially to remove that barrier between cars and cyclists, for example. So if cars are not exactly sure who is the dominant person in this traffic in the street, they are shown to slow down and they cause way less accidents. And then lastly, we have shared spaces. Shared spaces in streets are sort of a approach in urban design that minimizes the segregation, again, between motor vehicles and bikes and pedestrians. So by removing such things as curbs and road surface markings and traffic lights, they create a harmony between the traffic participants. And many traffic engineers have suggested that this sort of uncertainty, again, between sort of who is in charge here makes everyone reduce speed. And around Europe, around 400 towns and cities have actually started using these shared spaces. There's one around my house. And since then, they have reported both accidents and speeding rates have dropped drastically. So here we have some nice examples of the sort of barrier-less sidewalks and the streets being a little smoother, and it's just, yeah, very, very nice. Right, and then the last topic is meat consumption. Now, in the wake of our climate crisis, people still consume meat and dairy in insane amounts. And food production itself is facing a bottleneck due to, among others, environmental pollution, climate change, the spread of invasive species, depleting of natural resources, the heavy use of pesticides, herbicides, and antibiotics, and large-scale deforestation. Producing one hamburger, for example, uses enough fossil fuel to drive a small car for 20 miles. Of all raw materials and fossil fuel used in the US, more than 1/3 is devoted to raising animals for food. Precious land, crop, and water are used to raise animals who graze and pollute streams, for example. Globally, animal agriculture is responsible for more greenhouse gases than all the world's transportation system combined. So here on our presentation, we have a little stat for you. Currently, there are about 23 billion chickens, 1.5 billion cows, and roughly 1.5 billion pigs and sheep being raised and fed for consumption. Therefore, to make our food more environmentally friendly, reducing meat consumption is an urgent point, we think. And seeing that I say we as people from sort of, who live in cities, middle class, upper middle class people, we can often afford alternatives to meat. And therefore, it should be our duty to sort of, be able to switch to a more healthier way of living, to a more meat-reduced lifestyle, whereas people from poorer regions would actually depend on meat and they cannot afford alternatives. If all resources that we use to raise animals were not used for that cause, we could actually nourish an additional 3.5 billion people. And yeah, as mentioned, meat is not the most sustainable food good. It also has very little nutrition conversion efficiency. So cows only convert 4% of the proteins and 3% of the calories of the plants we feed into them. And yeah, here we have the water stat again. Right, so in our sustainable utopia, sort of, we would encourage our citizens to move away from a meat-based and meat-centered diet. And this would start by educating students in school how to live on a sustainable diet, and how to find different alternatives for protein and such. Also, we would encourage to buy from local producers and local, for example, farms, and to just support food sources that do not use a lot of traveling. Of course, people who have trouble with these sort of big transitions in their diet would be supported in their transition as well. So the idea is to sort of make them switch first from beef and lamb, which are the most impacting meat sources, to chicken and pig, which are less, obviously still substantially impacting to the environment, but they're less impacting, and then sort of make that transition from eating only chicken and pig to eating less and less and less and less, and then finally ending up with a more plant-centered diet. After all, generations before us have been living on mostly plant-based diets where sort of meats and dairy and eggs were reserved for special occasions. Right. So these are sort of the main points that we thought would be very important, but also the most realistic to sort of change in an urban environment. We hope you enjoyed our presentation, and yeah, I hope you guys sort of learned a little something. And we would also like to thank all the organizers of this project for the incredible chance to work together and to implement our ideas.